Hey guys, this is PODFIC, and today we're going to be reading The Right Substitution is Key by Addicted Apples. This is Chapter 4. Jason thought that getting an appropriate amount of sleep was supposed to make someone less grumpy. However, now that Jason was forcing Robin to get his proper 8 hours a night, the kid had been extra peevish with Jason as a form of protest. He had thrown an absolute fit when Jason had interrupted him last night. The kid had been exploring the possibility that Bruce and Nightwing were stuck in an alternate universe. Jason didn't get why the kid was so mad about the interruption. He could get back to his multiversal math after he'd slept. The multiverse wasn't going anywhere, and the kid would do a better job when he was well rested. But no. Robin had almost punched Jason in the face when he'd been remotely locked out of the Bat computer by Babs. Honestly, it was kind of hilarious. Who knew that Jason would still be able to torture the new Robin while keeping a completely clear conscience? His methods were even Alfred approved. What a wonderful world he lived in. Batman and Robin were on their usual Friday night patrol, which Jason allowed Robin to cover completely since it wasn't a school night. The kid was giving him the silent treatment, and Jason was rather impressed by how petty Robin could be. They were about halfway through their patrol when a purple-caped vigilante swung into the scene. Jason knew her name was Spoiler, and she'd returned recently after some sort of near-death experience. No one had given him the details. "Hey, Bat boys," she said with a sarcastic salute. Robin held a hand up in greeting. Jason channeled his best emotionally stunted Batman voice and said, "Spoiler, are you well?" Spoiler tensed and regarded both of them with caution. "Who are you and what have you done with Batman and Robin?" "What?" Robin sputtered. "Batman is never this nice to me, and Robin is never this well rested." "Hey!" Robin objected. "All I said was, are you well?" Jason said, barely remembering to hold on to his Batman impression. "Exactly," Spoiler said solemnly. Damn, Jason had thought "Are you well" was a safe bet. He knew Spoiler had been Robin for a time, and "Are you well" was how Batman used to awkwardly ask Nightwing's help when he stopped being Robin. How badly had Batman treated this girl if it was such a huge red flag? Fucking Batman, always throwing away his child soldiers. Robin groaned. "Did Oracle tell you? Is this a joke? Oracle knows you're both imposters?" "I'm not an imposter," Robin said. "I asked someone to fill in for Batman since he and Nightwing are missing." "How do I know if you're telling the truth? Didn't Batman and Nightwing get abducted by aliens or something? You could be pod people." "We don't know what happened to them, and pod people aren't real." "That's exactly what a pod person would say." "As far as I know, that really is Robin." Oracle finally chimed in over all their comms. "And congrats, you're the first person to notice that Batman is a substitute." "You know what?" Spoiler said, crossing her arms. "I want a second opinion. Send in Batgirl." "What's that going to prove?" Robin asked. "Batgirl would know if you were a pod person," Spoiler said. "Plus, no aliens would be able to touch her awesomeness, so she couldn't be a pod person herself." Robin sighed. As Spoiler and Robin bantered, Jason could pick up an accent, an attitude in Spoiler not dissimilar to his own. She grew up in the rougher parts of Gotham, he could tell. Jason found himself liking her spunk. "Batgirl is headed your way," Oracle confirmed. The only thing Jason knew about the new Batgirl was that she could almost certainly kick his ass. He had enough sense to be apprehensive, even though he was reasonably sure he wasn't a pod person. Like, 80% sure. 86% on a good day. He is supposed to be dead after all. Like, you never know. Batgirl dropped in a few moments later, not making a single sound. She circled around the three of them a few times, then around just Robin, then finally around Jason, stopping in front of him and leaning towards him as she continued to study him. Jason got the sense he was being stared at by the thing at the top of the food chain. Then the feeling abated as the girl leaned back and nodded. "Not pod person," Batgirl said. "Dang," Spoiler said. "You wanted me to be a pod person?" Robin asked. Spoiler shrugged. "You would have been more interesting that way." "Rude." Batgirl giggled as she watched their exchange. Jason edged away from her slightly. He didn't need to be right next to an apex predator, thank you very much. "Wait," Spoiler said, breaking away from bickering with Robin and turning to Jason. "If you're not the usual Batman, then who are you?" "Red Hood," Jason said, waggling his fingers in a wave. "Nice to meet you." Spoiler spun back to face Robin. "You asked a crime lord to be Batman? OG Batman is going to be so mad. I'm jealous I didn't think of it first." Suddenly, Batgirl was giving off the bad vibes again as he regarded Jason. "Murderer." Yeah, Jason said, bristling. What is it to you? No guilt. I have nothing to feel guilty about, he retorted, despite it not being strictly true. Lie. Some guilt. Batgirl corrected herself. Creepy. Yeah, but not about the people I chose to kill, Jason said, arms crossed. They deserved it. They were all irredeemable monsters who would have gone on to hurt more people. I made sure they'd never hurt anyone ever again. Batgirl tilted her head at this, her stance softening. Truth. You believe. You feel much. For others. Then she heard it again. But killing bad. Should no kill. How about we agree to disagree? Jason tried. Kill bad. Hurts. Permanent. No kill. God damn. Apparently Batgirl wanted to have an impromptu moral debate. Permanent is the point, Jason said. I understand that the no-kill rule is supposed to give people the opportunity to change. But some people don't want to change. If we lived in a world where people who intended to continuously commit violent acts against innocent people stayed in prison, then I wouldn't argue for the death penalty either. But we don't live in that world. We live in Gotham. And in Gotham, murderous criminals who get their jollies from committing brutal murder use Arkham Asylum as a staycation spot. How do you think that feels for the victims? To know that the people who brutalized them or their family members are going to be out doing that same thing within a few months. And even if some of those violent criminals decided to stop, is it really okay for rapists and child traffickers and the like to be redeemed with no thought for the people they've already hurt? Is there really no limit to how much a person can do while still leaving room for a new lease on life? There were parties in the street for days after I killed the Joker. How can that be wrong? And it's not like I think killing these monsters is the only option either. But until they stop busting out of prison, and that's assuming they get sent to prison in the first place, with all the corruption in the system, killing them is the only thing that prevents more harm to the people in Gotham who are trying to save their lives and survive. I've decided to prioritize the safety of the victims and the innocent over the lives of those hurting them. If you want me to stop killing as Red Hood, then why don't you start by fixing Arkham Asylum, the justice system, or, I don't know, tossing any violent and frequent escapees into the Phantom Zone. Until then, don't get in my way. Everyone stared at Jason, and he realized perhaps he had gotten a bit too worked up in the midst of his debate. There was a crackle over comms, as if Oracle had gone to say something and then thought better of it. Batgirl was analyzing Jason closely, looking for what he couldn't tell. Eventually, Batgirl deflated. Agree to disagree. Jason smirked. Right. OG Batman would hate you, Spoiler said with an audible grin. I love it. Jason twitched at the comment but tried not to dwell on it. The fact that Bruce would hate what he'd become was old news. He didn't care what Bruce thought anyway. Thanks, he managed, deciding to take it as a compliment and resolutely ignoring the look Batgirl was loving at him. A scream cut through the night and the four vigilantes leapt into action. They descended on a group of muggers with prejudice, and quickly had them all incapacitated. Robin got to work comforting the victim as Spoiler and Batgirl zip-tied the perps. Jason stood back and observed with his arms crossed, trying to channel Batman vibes. As the situation was winding down, he approached Spoiler. You know, if you try and put your heel more in line with your hip at the beginning of the sidekick, you'll generate more power, Jason told the purple vigilante privately. He gave a quick demonstration of what he meant. Spoiler blinked up at him for a moment, and Jason still wondered if he had offended her. Alright, she said eventually. Anything else? Well, if you come to the Batcave for training, I can also teach you more acrobatics to incorporate into your fighting style. I'm surprised Batman and Nightwing haven't already covered this stuff for you. Spoiler snorted. Batman isn't my mentor. Neither is Nightwing. They didn't want to train me. All they ever did was try to get me to stop. I train with Batgirl sometimes, but she's very beyond my level and not great at instructions. Batman never offered to train you? Jason asked, somewhat horrified. What the hell? No wonder this girl almost died. He understood wanting to discourage kids from putting on capes, but you couldn't just leave them be if they insisted on going out. Not genuinely, Spoiler replied, bitterness seeping into her tone. At one point, he took me on to piss off Robin. Shit, what the fuck, B? Well, if you're open to some actual training, I'll teach you what I can. I'd feel a lot better about you running around out here if you're as prepared as possible. Spoiler lost all her good humor as she eyed him assessingly, then she grinned. Alright, new Batman, you're cool. We should keep you. Even if I'm not Batman, I'll be around as Red Hood if you need anything, Jason told her. He very much hoped he wasn't lying to her. However, there was a good chance that the real Batman would try chasing him out of the city or locking him up upon his return. Then again, it seemed like he'd managed to win over Alfred, so he might be safe, even from Batman. Everyone knew who was really in charge. Spoiler grinned at him behind the mask. I appreciate that, new Batman. Please just call him Batman, Robin begged. Nope. Spoiler grinned at Jason again, and he couldn't help but grin back. People didn't smile at him much when he was Red Hood, or when he was out in the cities for that matter. Jason knew he was large and intimidating now. While it was something he appreciated in his nightlife, it made for a very lonely day-to-day. Sure, when he was Red Hood, he'd get the occasional crime alley kid approaching him. The working girls were friendly when he wanted to check on them, and his underlings tended to bring him leftovers and interrupted him when he was working too long. But there was always an underlying caution to it. Red Hood might be looking out for crime alley, but he was still dangerous. He was still a villain. Lately, privately, Jason thought it was nice to take off his helmet, don the cowl, and be treated like a hero for a moment. To have someone like Spoiler grin at him. Of course, Jason chose villainy, and he didn't regret it. He chose villainy for a reason. He chose villainy because villains got shit done. A hero would never have killed the Joker. Sure, Jason had hoped that Batman would, but that was because he didn't truly intend to ask Batman. He wanted to ask Bruce. He wanted to ask the man he'd once seen as a father. That didn't matter anymore. What did matter was now he'd lost himself in the villainy. That, maybe, he did regret. He'd always intended to cross some lines, but he thought his actions were justifiable. Now he was thinking he'd slipped too far, and he hadn't really noticed until right this moment. Maybe it was never more apparent than right now. After offering to look out for a vigilante, he reminded him eerily of who he used to be. That some of his justification had gotten twisted along the way. Who he used to be would approve of some of his actions and plans, but there were certain things that would have horrified the little dead Robin. Jason had been planning to beat the shit out of the new Robin. He'd had reasoning for it, of course, and that reasoning had made sense to him at the time. But that didn't make it right. He'd known the truth then, too, that it wasn't right. But he hadn't needed to be right back then. He'd been entrenched in villainy. Villains don't need to be right. But he thought he'd at least been fair. Robin had signed up for getting beat on by villains, so it was fair. Jason could probably blame some of the faulty logic on dying, brain damage, and League of Assassins brainwashing. But those had still been his decisions. Killing the Joker, saving Robin, and becoming Batman, being able to step out of his descent into the villain mindset, was such a jarring interruption to his post-death thought patterns. He'd been so single-minded in his desire for revenge and change that he'd barely paused to think about anything else. The last few weeks, he'd felt like he was borrowing a completely different mindset. He was approaching life from a completely different angle. He certainly didn't want to become Batman full-time, but it was helping him recenter, get his bearings, adjust to the horrors of the recent years that had been thrown at him, and take a step back towards who he'd been before. Back when he'd been a hero. Back when he'd been liked. Back when he liked himself, when he'd been happy. He'd never be Robin again, and he didn't want to stop being Red Hood. But maybe he could work his way backwards towards some sort of middle ground. Maybe he could sit somewhere between being a hero and being a villain, and find some comfort there, for himself and for others. Maybe he could earn the grin a Spoiler had shot at him. Alright guys, and that is the end of chapter 4 of The Right Substitution is Key by Addicted Apple. I'll be exacted in the 6th chapter.